The wedding dress cost more than a house. A whisper of Italian silk and hand-sewn pearls. It was designed to make Charlotte Reed look like a princess, and she did. Standing on the immaculate lawns of the Van Doren estate in Newport, with the Atlantic Ocean glittering behind her, she was the picture of a fairy tale bride. Everyone called it the wedding of the decade, the union of Spencer Van Doren, heir to a global shipping empire, and the brilliant but unknown artist he'd plucked from obscurity. But beneath the flawless makeup and the radiant smile, a knot of ice was forming in Charlotte's stomach. She was about to learn that in the world of old money, a fairy tale can become a gilded cage, and the prince can be the monster. What her new husband didn't know was that a silent guardian was watching, and the biggest storm of the century was about to crash his perfect party. The air on the Newport coast carried the scent of salt water and privilege. It clung to the cascading white roses that framed the marble gazebo, and mingled with the expensive perfume of the 400 guests. This was the world of the Van Dorens, a world of inherited power and unspoken rules, and today, Charlotte. Charlie Reed was meant to officially enter it. From her vantage point in the bridal suite of the colossal Van Doren summer cottage, a term that did a grave injustice to the 30-room limestone mansion, Charlie watched the guests arrive. They were a sea of muted pastels and bespoke suits, their movements fluid and confident. They were the titans of industry, the political power brokers, the blue-blooded scions of families who had run the country for generations. And they were all here to witness her marriage to Spencer Van Doren. Spencer. Even his name felt like it was carved from granite. He was impossibly handsome, with a jawline that seemed engineered for magazine covers and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He had swept into her life like a tempest, discovering her art at a small gallery in Soho, buying out her entire collection, and then relentlessly pursuing her. He'd showered her with affection, praised her talent, and promised her a world where she would never have to worry about rent or obscurity again. Charlie, an orphan who had bounced between foster homes before aging out of the system, had been understandably swept away. Her life had been a constant struggle, a series of grey canvases she'd tried to fill with colour. Spencer had arrived with a whole new palette, one filled with glittering golds and brilliant sapphires. She had fallen in love not with the money, but with the man she thought he was the one who saw her, the real her, behind the layers of paint and charcoal. But lately the gold had started to feel like brass. Her maid of honor and only true friend, Leah Jenkins, adjusted the delicate veil on Charlie's head. Leah, a no-nonsense social worker, who had been with Charlie since their days in the final group home, had a perpetually worried crease between her brows. That crease had deepened over the past 6 months. "You look breathtaking, Charlie," said her voice, soft but strained, "like you stepped out of a painting." "I feel like I'm about to be framed," Charlie murmured, a weak attempt at a joke. The red flags had been small at first. Spencer's casual dismissal of her friends from her old life, his suggestions that her art become more commercially palatable. The way his mother, Beatrice Van Doren, looked at her not with malice, but with the polite disinterest one might afford a decorative vase. Beatrice was a woman of sharp angles, and sharper words, a gatekeeper to a society Charlie was beginning to suspect she could never truly join. Spencer's father, Conrad, was even more imposing, a silent, formidable patriarch who ran Van Doren Global Holdings with an iron will. He had shaken her hand once and seemed to calculate her net worth with his cold, assessing gaze. The final blaring alarm had been the prenuptial agreement. It hadn't been presented by lawyers in a sterile office. Spencer had brought it to her on a silver tray, with champagne, calling it a formality to appease the board. It was less an agreement and more a declaration of her powerlessness. She would receive a generous allowance, but would have no claim on any Van Doren assets, present or future. Any art she created during the marriage would be considered property of the estate. And there was an insidious conduct clause, so vague it could be used to nullify the entire contract if she ever brought disrepute upon the Van Doren name. When she hesitated, Spencer's charm had frosted over. "It's just business, darling," he'd said, his voice losing its warmth. "You wouldn't want my family to think you're in this for the wrong reasons, would you?" The implication was clear. Sign it, or this fairy tale ends. Terrified of losing him and being cast back into the precarious life she'd fought so hard to escape, she had signed it. Leah had called her a fool. Charlie had called herself a coward. Now, standing in a dress worth more than every possession she'd ever owned, she felt the weight of that signature. "It's time," Beatrice Van Doren announced, appearing in the doorway. She was a vision in dove-grey Chanel, her smile a perfect, bloodless line. She didn't look at Charlie, but rather at the final product she had curated. "The guests are seated. Conrad is waiting to walk you down the aisle." Charlie's parents were long gone, a faded photograph her only memory. Having Conrad Van Doren, a man who radiated disapproval, escort her to her wedding felt like a final symbolic surrender. As she walked down the endless lawn, a string quartet playing a hauntingly beautiful piece by Vivaldi, every eye was on her. She saw Spencer waiting, a confident, possessive smile on his face. For a fleeting moment, the doubt vanished. He was so handsome, so sure. This was her future. She just had to be strong enough to fit into it. But as she took her place beside him, he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. Under the cover of the music, he whispered, "Smile, darling. You look terrified. You should be grateful. Today is the first day of your real life." It wasn't a reassurance. It was a command. And in that moment, under the brilliant September sun, Charlie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. The knot of ice in her stomach tightened. She was standing at the altar, but it felt like the edge of a cliff. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of curated perfection. Spencer didn't just take her to dinner. He booked out Michelin-starred restaurants. He didn't just buy her flowers. He had her small apartment filled with exotic orchids, flown in from Singapore. He'd introduced her to a life that until then she had only observed from a distance, like a visitor at a museum. He had seemed so interested in her art, spending hours in her chaotic studio. He would watch her work, his expression one of rapt fascination. "You create worlds from nothing." Charlie, he'd said once, tracing the line of a charcoal sketch. "It's magic." He had funded her first solo exhibition, ensuring it was reviewed by the city's top critics. But looking back, Charlie could now see the subtle brushstrokes of his control. He'd subtly guided her away from her more provocative political pieces, the ones that screamed with the raw emotion of her past. He'd nudged her toward landscapes and serene abstracts. "They're more elegant, more timeless," he'd explained. "They will look magnificent in the homes of my clients." Her raw, jagged style, born from the harsh realities of the foster system, was being sanded down, polished into something smooth and inoffensive, something that would match the drapes in a Park Avenue penthouse. The first time she felt the true sting of his family's condescension was at a Hamptons gala 3 months into their relationship. Dressed in a borrowed gown, Charlie had tried to make conversation with a circle of Beatrice's friends. One of them, a woman named Genevieve Dupont, had asked about her background. Charlie, determined not to be ashamed of her past, had answered honestly. I grew up in the state system, mostly in and around Queens. A polite, icy silence fell over the group. Genevieve had then smiled a tight, pitying smile. Oh, you poor dear. How resourceful of you to have come so far. Spencer is such a philanthropist, isn't he? The message was clear. She was not a guest. She was a charity project. When she later told Spencer about the comment, hoping for his defense, he had simply shrugged. Genevieve is a dinosaur, darling. Don't pay her any mind. You just need to learn how their world works. Thicker skin is part of the uniform. He hadn't defended her honor. He had critiqued her reaction. Leah had been her only anchor to reality. He's not buying your art. Charlie, he's buying you. She'd warned after a particularly fraught dinner with the Van Dorens, where every question felt like an interrogation. They're not welcoming you into their family. They're acquiring a new asset. Can't you see the difference? Charlie had accused Leah of being cynical. You don't know him, she'd insisted. When we're alone, he's different. And he was. In private, he could be tender, attentive, and passionate. He made her feel cherished and safe. Two things she had craved her entire life. He was the architect of a beautiful dream, and she was so desperate to live in it that she ignored the fact that the foundation was built on sand. The week before the wedding, she'd received a small package in the mail. It was postmarked from Seattle with no return address. Inside was a simple hand-carved wooden bird, a wren looking mid-flight. There was no note, just the object itself, smooth and familiar in her hand. It was the last thing her mother, a gifted wood carver, had been working on before she died in a car crash alongside Charlie's father. Charlie was only 4. The bird had vanished in the chaos that followed. The only other person who knew of its existence was her mother's younger brother, her Uncle Declan. He was a ghost in her life, a man she barely remembered. After her parents' death, there had been a bitter custody dispute with her paternal grandparents, which Declan, a broke college student at the time, had lost. He had sent letters and gifts for years, but her grandparents, who blamed him for their son's free-spirited lifestyle, had returned them all. After they passed away and she entered the system, all contact was lost. For all she knew, he could be anywhere doing anything. Holding the wren, Charlie felt a pang of a life she might have had, a life with family. She'd tried to find him online over the years, but Declan Monroe was a surprisingly common name, and she had no leads. She showed the bird to Spencer. He'd picked it up, examined it with a detached air, and said, "Quaint. A little rustic for our home, but a sweet gesture from whoever sent it." He had completely missed the monumental significance of it. For him, it was just another object to be assessed for its aesthetic value. For her, it was a piece of her soul. That was the moment the dream truly began to fracture. She realized that Spencer didn't see her world. He only saw how her world could be absorbed into his. Now standing at the altar, the officiant's words washing over her, she clutched her bouquet of white peonies so tightly her knuckles were white. The vows they had written together were about to be spoken. Spencer had insisted they write their own. "It's more personal, more modern," he'd said. She now understood it was just another opportunity for performance. Spencer began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying across the silent crowd. He spoke of her beauty, her talent, the light she brought into his life. It was a perfect speech, poetic and moving. The guests sighed contentedly. Beatrice Van Doren dabbed a tearless eye with a silk handkerchief. Then it was Charlie's turn. She looked into his stormy eyes and began to recite the words she had practiced, words of love and devotion. But as she spoke them, they tasted like ash in her mouth. She felt like an actress in a play she hadn't realized was a tragedy. "And I promise to love you, to honor you, and to build my life with you from this day forward," she finished, her voice trembling slightly. The officiant beamed. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Spencer, you may kiss your bride." As Spencer leaned in, his lips were not soft or tender. They were firm, a mark of ownership. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound like roaring waves, and as he pulled back, a triumphant smirk on his face, Charlie felt the cold, hard click of a lock, sealing her inside the gilded cage. The reception was an exercise in staggering opulence. Held under a magnificent sailcloth tent that looked like the cathedral of some celestial being, it was a world of shimmering, crystal-towering floral arrangements and champagne that flowed like water. A renowned jazz orchestra played from a raised dais, their smooth melodies providing the perfect soundtrack for the quiet clinking of glasses and murmurs of polite, powerful conversation. Charlie felt adrift in the glittering sea. Guests would approach her, their smiles wide, but their eyes analytical. They congratulated her, but their compliments were all directed at Spencer. "You are a lucky woman, my dear. Spencer is one of a kind. What a catch, you must be over the moon." She was not the other half of a partnership. She was the prize he had won. She moved through the crowd, a perfect smile fixed on her face, while Leah shadowed her a protective, worried presence. "Are you okay?" Leah whispered as they stood near the towering 9-tiered wedding cake. "I'm fine," Charlie lied, taking a sip of champagne she didn't want. "It's all just a little overwhelming." "Overwhelming is one word for it," Leah muttered, eyeing Beatrice Van Doren as she corrected a waiter on the proper angle to hold a serving tray. The traditional toasts began. Conrad Van Doren gave a brief, unsentimental speech about legacy and the continuation of the Van Doren line. Leah offered a heartfelt, slightly tearful tribute to Charlie's strength and resilience, earning polite but muted applause. Then Spencer stood up and took the golden microphone. A hush fell over the tent. He was a natural performer, basking in the attention. "Thank you all for being here." He began, his voice smooth as velvet. "Today I am the luckiest man in the world." He smiled at Charlie, a perfect camera-ready smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I have married a woman of immense beauty, and as some of you know, a surprising amount of talent." A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Charlie felt a prickle of unease. Surprising amount. "When I first met Charlie, he continued, his tone shifting into that of a master storyteller. She was a true diamond in the rough. Very, very rough." More laughter this time, a little louder. Charlie's smile began to feel brittle. She was living in a tiny walk-up in a part of the city my driver usually locks the doors for. Her canvases were filled with, well, a lot of passion, a lot of angry, messy, confusing passion. His gaze swept over the guests, drawing them into his little joke. I saw something there beneath the grit and the grime, a potential for elegance, a potential for greatness. I knew that with a little guidance, a little polishing, she could become something truly special. The prickle of unease turned into a cold dread that spread through Charlie's veins. This wasn't a toast to his new wife. This was a speech about his latest acquisition, He was taking credit not just for discovering her art, but for creating her. He raised his glass. Many of you have come to me over the past few months, asking about my dear Charlotte. Where did you find her? You'd ask. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes twinkling with performative mischief. Well, I suppose you could say this has been my greatest project yet. A bit of a philanthropic endeavor, if you will. The words hit her like physical blows. Project. Philanthropic endeavor. He was painting her as a charity case he had graciously uplifted from the gutter in front of 400 of the most influential people on the East Coast. He was erasing her struggle, her survival, her identity, and recasting her as a pretty object he had salvaged. So I want to propose a toast, Spencer said, his voice ringing with false magnanimity. Not just to my beautiful bride, but to the power of transformation, to prove that with the right patronage anything can be made beautiful, from a lump of clay to a magnificent sculpture, from a street urchin to a Van Doren. The tent erupted in a mixture of applause and slightly uncomfortable laughter. Beatrice was beaming with pride. Conrad gave a slight approving nod. They saw nothing wrong with this. To them, it was the simple truth. They had elevated her. She should be grateful. Charlie stood frozen, the champagne glass shaking in her hand. The blood roared in her ears, drowning out the applause. Every condescending glance, every backhanded compliment, every dismissive comment from the past 6 months suddenly coalesced into this one moment of profound public humiliation. He hadn't just insulted her. He had negated her entire existence. He had held up her life, her pain, and her triumphs as a amusing anecdote for his rich friends. Leah rushed to her side, her face a mask of fury. That absolute son of a but Charlie couldn't hear her. She looked at Spencer, who was now accepting congratulations from his friends, laughing as if he'd just told the cleverest joke in the world. He caught her eye and gave her a wink, as if to say, "See, I made you famous." In that wink, she saw the full, unvarnished truth. He didn't love her. He loved the story of her. He loved the power he held over her. The gilded cage wasn't a metaphor. It was real, and he had just publicly displayed her in it. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She wanted to run, to scream, to shatter the crystal glasses and tear the perfect roses from their vases. But she was paralyzed, trapped by the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. She had never felt more alone in her life. And then over the lingering applause and the orchestra striking up a new tune, another sound began to intrude. A low, rhythmic thumping, distant at first, but growing steadily louder. Whump, whump, whump. Heads began to turn, looking not at the bride and groom, but towards the sky over the ocean. The sound grew into a powerful, deep-throated roar, drowning out the music. It was the sound of an approaching helicopter. The helicopter was a sleek, menacing shape against the pastel sunset. It was matte black, with no identifying markings, looking more like a piece of military hardware than a civilian aircraft. It wasn't circling or passing by. It was descending purposefully and inexorably towards the immaculate Van Doren lawn. Panic mixed with outrage rippled through the crowd. Guests shielded their eyes, their expensive hairstyles whipped into disarray by the growing downdraft. Waitstaff struggled to keep champagne flutes from toppling over. The meticulously crafted atmosphere of serene elegance was being torn apart by the roaring blades. Spencer's face moments before, flush with triumph, was now a thunderous mask of fury. "What in the hell is this?" he snarled to his father. "Security, get rid of that thing!" Conrad Van Doren was already barking into his phone, his face grim. "I have an unauthorized aircraft landing on my property. I want it grounded and I want the pilot arrested. Now! But the helicopter paid no heed. It continued its descent, the roar becoming deafening. The sailcloth tent billowed violently, and the towering centerpiece of roses and lilies on the head table crashed to the floor, shattering its vase. A woman screamed. The aircraft settled onto the grass with a final powerful gust, its blades slowing with a series of resonant whomps until they stilled. For a moment, there was an unnatural silence, broken only by the distant cry of a gull and the frantic murmurs of the guests. All 400 pairs of eyes were fixed on the black machine, now sitting incongruously on the perfect green lawn, a dark omen that had crashed their perfect day. The side door slid open with a quiet pneumatic hiss. A man stepped out. He was not what anyone expected. He wasn't a celebrity looking for attention or a crazed party crasher. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark grey suit, with no tie, his white shirt open at the collar. He looked to be in his late 40s, with a lean, athletic build, short-cropped salt and pepper hair, and a face that was calm to the point of being unnerving. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, swept over the chaotic scene with an unnerving lack of emotion. He looked less like a guest and more like a predator who had just entered a new hunting ground. He was followed by a woman in a severe black business suit, holding a leather portfolio. "Who the hell are you?" Spencer bellowed, striding across the lawn. His wedding suit now looking absurdly out of place. 2 burly security guards hired for the event flanked him, looking uncertain. The man ignored Spencer. His gaze scanned the crowd until it found Charlie. She was standing by the ruined head table, a single white peony clutched in her hand, her face pale and tear-streaked. Their eyes met across the 50 yards of trampled grass. For a dizzying second, Charlie felt a flicker of recognition. There was something in the sharp line of his jaw, in the intensity of his blue eyes that reminded her of the faded photograph of her mother. The man began to walk towards her, his steps measured and unhurried. The security guards moved to intercept him. "Sir, this is a private event," one of them said, putting a hand on his chest. "You need to leave immediately." The man didn't even break his stride. He simply said one word, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. "Don't." The guard froze his hand, dropping as if he'd touched a live wire. There was a palpable aura of power around this stranger, a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. He walked past the guards as if they were statues. He stopped a few feet from Charlie. His expression, which had been impassive, softened with a trace of sorrow as he looked at her ruined makeup and the anguish in her eyes. "Charlotte," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I am so sorry I'm late." Charlie stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. The strange package, the hand-carved wren this man's sudden impossible appearance. "Do I know you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Before he could answer, Spencer reached them, his face purple with rage. "I don't know who you are, pal, but you have 30 seconds to get back in your ridiculous toy and get off my property before I have you thrown in jail for the next decade." The stranger finally turned his attention to Spencer. He looked him up and down, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in his eyes. It was the same way a biologist might examine an insect. "You must be Spencer Van Doren," the man said, his voice flat. "I've read about you. You're even more disappointing in person." Spencer was momentarily stunned into silence by the sheer audacity. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "Oh, I think I do," the man replied calmly. He turned back to Charlie, his voice softening again. "My name is Declan Monroe. Your mother, Catherine, was my older sister." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Charlie's hand flew to her mouth. Declan. Her uncle. The ghost from her past. The sender of the wren was standing right here. It was impossible. "Uncle. Declan," she breathed. He gave a small, sad smile. "I know this is a lot to take in. I haven't been the uncle I should have been. That is a failure I will regret for the rest of my life. But I am here now." He gestured vaguely towards the wreckage of the reception, "and it seems I arrived just in time." Spencer let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter. "Uncle. This is your family, Charlie. Some lunatic who flies around in a helicopter. I should have known. You can take the girl out of the gutter." Declan's calm demeanor didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. "That will be the last time you speak about my niece that way." "Or what?" Spencer sneered, emboldened by the presence of his family, his guests, and his security. "You'll make a scene you already have. You've ruined my wedding." "Your wedding," Declan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Yet every person on the lawn seemed to hear it. "From what I heard of your toast, this wasn't a wedding. It was a victory party celebrating your own ego, a public humiliation of a woman you profess to love." Conrad and Beatrice Van Doren had now arrived, their faces etched with cold fury. "Mr. Monroe, is it?" Conrad said, his voice like grinding stones. "Whatever family drama you think you're playing out here, it's over. Leave. Now." Declan finally turned his full, chilling attention to the Van Doren patriarch. "Conrad," he said, the informal use of his name a calculated insult. "You and I are going to have a conversation. But first," he looked back at the stunned and confused Charlie. "My niece needs to make a choice." He held out his hand to her. It was a simple, open gesture. "Charlotte, you can stay here in this life, or you can come with me. Right now. The choice is entirely yours. But I want you to know you are not alone. Not anymore." Charlie looked from the outstretched hand of the uncle she never knew to the enraged face of the man she had just married. She saw the glittering, shattered reception a perfect metaphor for her supposed fairy tale. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a ward of the state or a struggling artist or Spencer's project. She was a woman with a choice. And in the silence that followed under the watchful gaze of 400 people, she let the single white peony drop from her fingers and took her uncle's hand. A collective gasp went through the crowd as Charlie's fingers wrapped around Declan's. It was a definitive symbolic act that shifted the power dynamic on the lawn in a way no one could have anticipated. Spencer's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and wounded pride. "Charlie, what are you doing? Don't be ridiculous. Get back here." It was a command, not a plea. Charlie, her hand held firmly in her uncle's, felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She looked her new husband in the eye, her voice clear and steady for the first time that day. "No." The single word, quiet but absolute, hung in the air. "Fine." Spencer spat, his charm evaporating to reveal the ugly, entitled man beneath. "Run off with your long-lost trailer trash relative. See how far you get. That prenup you signed is ironclad. You walk away from this marriage, you walk away with nothing. Exactly what you came with." Declan Monroe gave a humorless smile. "That brings us to the second part of our conversation." He turned to Conrad and Spencer. "You see, you've both made a catastrophic miscalculation. You assumed Charlotte was alone. You assumed she was without resources. You assumed she was powerless. Assumptions can be expensive." He nodded to his assistant, the woman in the black suit. She stepped forward and opened her leather portfolio. "Conrad Spencer, Declan said, his tone now taking on the crisp, precise quality of a surgeon about to make an incision. "I'd like to introduce you to my chief counsel, Ms. Albright. She has some documents for you." Ms. Albright handed a sheaf of papers to a bewildered Conrad. Spencer snatched one, and his eyes scanned the first page. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" Conrad demanded, his voice strained. "Aperture Dynamics. What is this company?" "Aperture Dynamics," Declan explained patiently, as if to a child, "is my primary holding company. It's a private technology firm based in Seattle. We specialize in satellite logistics, data encryption, and AI-driven market analysis. We're very discreet. We don't put our name on stadiums." He paused, letting the information sink in. Over the last 18 months, Aperture Dynamics, through a series of shell corporations and third-party brokers, has been quietly acquiring a significant position in your company, Van Doren Global Holdings. Conrad's eyes widened in horror as he flipped through the pages, seeing the transaction records, the share certificates. "You've been buying our stock," he whispered, the realization dawning. "Buying it?" Declan chuckled, a dry, cold sound. "Conrad, I've been devouring it. As of the market's close on Friday, my company became the single largest non-family shareholder in Van Doren Global. We control just over 32% of the public float." A wave of shocked murmurs spread through the guests, many of whom were investors or business rivals of the Van Dorens. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. It was a corporate takeover announcement happening on a wedding lawn. "That's impossible," Spencer stuttered, looking desperately at his father. "We would have seen it. The SEC filings." "My lawyers are better than your lawyers," Declan stated simply. "We are perfectly legal, just smarter. Your company has been undervalued for years, bloated by arrogance and nepotism." He gave Spencer a pointed look. It was a prime target. Declan took a step closer, his voice dropping so only the Van Dorens could hear, though his posture broadcasted dominance to everyone. "When I found out my niece, my sister's only child, whom I had spent 2 decades searching for, was marrying into your family, I initiated a deep-dive investigation. I had to know what kind of man she was marrying." His cold blue eyes locked onto Spencer. "And what I found was fascinating. You, Spencer, are not just an arrogant fool. You're a thief. That's slander," Beatrice shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "Is it?" Declan countered, nodding again to Ms. Albright. She produced a second, slimmer file and handed it to Conrad. "These are encrypted transaction logs and sworn affidavits from the executive vice president of your South American shipping division, a man named Gregory Nash." Spencer looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Gregory Nome." "Oh yes," Declan said. "Mr. Nash was very cooperative once we showed him our own evidence and offered him full immunity and a very comfortable retirement. It turns out he was tired of helping you systematically embezzle funds from your own family's company through a network of phantom suppliers and inflated invoices. A very clever scheme. You've siphoned off nearly $9 million over the past 2 years. I believe you were planning on using it to fund your own venture capital firm and break away from Daddy." Conrad Van Doren looked at the file, then at his son's ashen face. The evidence was clearly undeniable. The patriarch, a man known for his iron self-control, seemed to shrink before their eyes. The foundation of his legacy was cracking beneath his feet. "So here is where we are," Declan Monroe said, laying out the terms of surrender. "In 1 hour, I will be releasing a press statement announcing my controlling stake in Van Doren Global and my intention to call for an emergency board meeting to nominate a new chairman. Me." He let that bomb drop into the stunned silence. "Furthermore," These documents," he gestured to the embezzlement file, "will be handed over to the SEC and the District Attorney's office. Unless—" He paused, letting the Van Dorens hang on the precipice. "Unless what?" Conrad asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Declan's gaze was glacial. "Unless this marriage is annulled. Immediately. Every contract, including that disgusting prenup, is rendered null and void. You will issue a public apology to Charlotte for the profound misunderstanding and emotional distress caused at this event. And you—" He looked at Spencer with pure loathing. "Will disappear. You will resign from the company, from the board, from every charity and club you belong to. You will transfer $5 million, less than half of what you stole, into a trust for Charlotte as restitution. You will do all of this, and in return I will agree to handle your little fraud problem. Internally. The evidence will be sealed." He had them completely and utterly trapped. He could ruin them publicly and send Spencer to prison, or he could take control of their company and merely banish the heir apparent. It was a checkmate disguised as a choice. "This is extortion," Spencer yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "No," Declan corrected him, his voice like chipping ice. "This is consequences. You built a cage for my niece made of your money and your name. You just discovered that her family builds much, much bigger cages." He turned his back on them, then a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He looked only at Charlie, his expression softening once more. "The helicopter is waiting," he said gently. "We can go whenever you're ready." Charlie looked at the shattered faces of the Van Doren family. She saw Spencer not as a prince, but as a petulant, spoiled child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. She saw the empire she had almost married into revealed to be a house of cards. And she felt nothing. No regret, no sadness. Only a profound, cleansing relief. Still holding her uncle's hand, she walked away from the wreckage of her wedding, away from the life she thought she wanted, and toward the black helicopter that had descended from the sky like an avenging angel. She didn't look back once. The interior of the helicopter was a world away from the chaos on the lawn. It was silent, insulated, and smelled of new leather and clean, sterile air. As the door hissed shut, it cut off the horrified whispers and enraged shouts of the wedding guests cocooning Charlie and Declan in a private orpheum of calm. As the aircraft lifted off the ground, Charlie looked down one last time. The scene below was one of utter disarray, the perfect white tent, the scattered guests looking up like startled ants, the Van Doren family huddled together looking small and defeated. Spencer was on his knees on the grass, his head in his hands. It was a satisfying, almost cinematic image of ruin. She turned away from the window, feeling the last of the day's poison drain out of her. She was still in her absurdly expensive wedding dress, a costume from a life she had inhabited for only a few hours. Tears began to fall silently down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of shock, of a deep, bone-weary gratitude that was so overwhelming it hurt. Declan sat across from her, watching her with a quiet, patient concern. He didn't speak, allowing her the space to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in her life. After a few minutes, he reached into a small cooler and handed her a bottle of cold water. "Drink," he said softly. "You're probably dehydrated." His practicality was grounding. She took the bottle, her hands still shaking slightly. "How did you find me?" she finally asked, her voice raspy. "And all of this—" She gestured around the luxurious cabin, a symbol of a power she couldn't comprehend. Declan leaned back in his seat. "It's a long story, Charlotte. After your parents died, and I lost the custody battle, Well, I threw myself into my work. I was angry at the world, at your grandparents, at myself. I funneled all of that into building something. Aperture Dynamics. He sighed, a rare flicker of vulnerability in his stoic demeanor. I never stopped looking for you. I hired private investigators, but the system is a labyrinth. Minors who are wards of the state are protected, their files sealed. It was only when you turned 18 and your name entered public records that I got my first real lead. By then, you were already moving around, fighting to make it on your own. Why didn't you just show up? She asked, the question laced with years of unspoken loneliness. Pride. He admitted, his voice low. And shame. I didn't want to reappear in your life as a failure. I wanted to be able to offer you stability, to give you back some of what was taken from you. So I waited. I kept track of you from a distance. I saw you were a fighter, that you had your mother's talent and your father's spirit. I was so proud of you. I told myself I would let you build your own life, that I wouldn't interfere unless you were in real trouble. He looked her straight in the eye. When my people flagged that you were engaged to Spencer Van Doren, that's when I considered you in real trouble. The Van Dorens have a reputation. I initiated the corporate acquisition as a contingency plan, a weapon to be used only if necessary. I wanted to believe he truly loved you. I hoped I would never have to land on that lawn. The toast was when you decided, Charlie asked. I had a live audio feed, Declan confirmed. As soon as he called you his philanthropic endeavor, I told the pilot to take us in. No man who loves a woman would ever speak of her that way. He sees you as a thing to be owned, not a person to be cherished. My sister would have haunted me for eternity if I had let her daughter stay with a man like that. The mention of her mother sent a fresh wave of emotion through Charlie. The wren, she whispered, touching the pocket of a hidden seam in her dress, where she had tucked it away for safekeeping. You sent it. I found it in a box of your mother's old things I'd kept, he said with a small smile. I hoped you would remember. I wanted you to know that a part of your real family was still out there thinking of you before you married into a false one. The helicopter banked, and through the window Charlie could see the lights of New York City beginning to sparkle on the horizon. It was a city that had nearly broken her, the city where she had fallen for a beautiful lie. Now she was returning to it, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Meanwhile, back on the lawn, the fallout was apocalyptic. Once the helicopter was gone, Conrad Van Doren had turned to his son with a look of pure, cold fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. You are a fool, Conrad stated each word, a chip of ice. You brought this viper into our lives, and then you handed him the stick to beat us with. Embezzlement, $9 million. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Spencer began, but his father cut him off. Silence. You have done enough damage for one lifetime. He turned to Ms. Albright, who stood impassively watching the family drama unfold. We accept the terms, all of them. Get your office on the line. I want my lawyers to interface with yours immediately to draft the annulment papers and the public apology. The funds will be transferred by morning. Beatrice was sobbing not for Charlie's humiliation or her son's criminality, but for the catastrophic social implosion. Our name, Conrad. Our reputation. Our name is now tied to Declan Monroe's, Conrad retorted bitterly, and he holds all the cards. We will play the game by his rules, or we will have nothing left to our name at all. He looked down at his son, still kneeling on the ground. Get up, Spencer. You are a disgrace to this family. As of this moment, you are no longer a part of it or this company. Go. I don't want to see your face again." Spencer finally looked up, his eyes wild with panic. He had lost everything in the space of 30 minutes: his wife, his family, his fortune, his future. He had been so sure of his power, so confident in his gilded world, that he never imagined someone could simply arrive and take it all away. As the remaining guests fled the scene, whispering furiously into their phones and spreading the news of the Van Doren collapse like wildfire, Spencer Van Doren was left utterly and completely alone amidst the ruins of his own making. 6 months later, the Soho art scene was buzzing with an energy it hadn't felt in years. The talk of the town wasn't a new installation by a well-established name, but the debut solo exhibition of a resurrected talent, Charlotte Reed. The gallery was packed. Critics, collectors, and artists crowded the spacious white-walled rooms, their voices a low hum of appreciative murmurs. This was not the art of Spencer Van Doren's project. This was the art of Charlie Reed unleashed. The canvases were large, bold, and fiercely emotional. There were jagged, abstract representations of loneliness and fear, rendered in charcoal and deep, bruised purples. There were vibrant, explosive paintings depicting breakthrough and freedom, using colors so bright they almost vibrated off the canvas. And at the center of the exhibition, in a place of honor, was a series of portraits. They were raw and unflinching, capturing the vulnerability and strength of faces she had known in the foster system. It was the work she had been told to abandon, now resurrected with a skill and passion that was breathtaking. Charlie stood near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the crowd. She wore a simple black dress, her hair cut in a stylish, no-nonsense bob. She looked confident, centered, and happy. Gone was the haunted, uncertain woman in the wedding dress. After the annulment, she had moved into a beautiful loft apartment in Tribeca, a gift from Declan that featured a massive, light-filled studio. He had been a constant, steady presence in her life. Not a savior, but a supporter. He hadn't told her what to do. He had simply given her the resources and the security to figure it out for herself. He'd helped her reconnect with her past, sharing stories and photographs of the mother she barely remembered. For the first time, Charlie felt rooted. Leah was there, beaming her arm linked with Charlie's. "I told you," Leah said, nudging her. "I told you this was who you were. He didn't make you. He just tried to bury you. Look at you now." A distinguished-looking man with a white beard, the renowned art critic Julian Croft, approached her. "Miss Reed," he said, his eyes alight with admiration. "This is a triumphant return. Your work, it's honest, brutally, beautifully honest. You have a voice that deserves to be heard." Before Charlie could respond, a commotion near the gallery entrance drew everyone's attention. A murmur went through the room as people recognized the newcomer. It was Spencer Van Doren. He was a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, his hair unkempt. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. After being publicly disowned, he had become a pariah. The business world wouldn't touch him, and his former friends crossed the street to avoid him. He walked directly to Charlie, his eyes pleading. "Charlie," he said, his voice raspy. I had to see you. What you've done here, it's incredible. It's the work I first fell in love with." Charlie looked at him, feeling not anger, not hatred, but a profound and weary pity. "No, Spencer. You fell in love with the idea of owning it, of taming it. You never saw this. You never saw me. I was a fool. he pleaded, reaching for her hand. "I was arrogant. My family, the pressure. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a second chance. I love you." Charlie gently pulled her hand away. "The man you were 6 months ago would find this display of weakness pathetic. The woman I am today finds it sad. You don't love me, Spencer. You miss what I represented, a victory you could show off to your friends. You lost, and you can't stand it. That's not love. It's just ego." From the corner of the room, a tall figure detached himself from the shadows. Declan Monroe had been there the whole time, watching silently. He walked over, not in a threatening way, but simply to stand beside his niece, a silent wall of support. Spencer saw him and flinched, all the fight draining out of him. He looked from Declan's unwavering gaze to Charlie's resolute face. There was nothing for him here. No redemption, no second chance. He had burned that bridge with a golden microphone. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the gallery, disappearing into the New York night. The buzz in the room slowly returned. Julian Croft cleared his throat. "Well," he said with a small smile, "it seems the art isn't the only thing with a compelling backstory." Charlie laughed, a real, genuine laugh. She looked around the room at her paintings, her truth displayed for all to see. She looked at her best friend, Leah, and the uncle who had crossed the country and moved mountains for her. Her life was not a fairy tale. It was something far better. It was real. It was hers. And as the first "Sold" sticker was placed on her largest, most defiant painting, she knew with absolute certainty that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. So what do you think? Was it the ultimate revenge? Or was it simply justice? Served cold. Charlotte's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never determined by the people who try to define us, but by the strength we find to define ourselves. She thought she was marrying a prince, but she was saved by a king who didn't rescue her, but simply handed her the crown she already deserved. It shows that sometimes the family we think we've lost is the one waiting in the wings to help us fly. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's true colors were revealed at the worst possible time? What would you have done if you were in Charlie's shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of justice and empowerment, please show your support by hitting that like button. Sharing this video with someone who loves a story where the bully gets what's coming to them, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more unforgettable stories to share with you, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening.